Told Devin he ain't ever got to apologize for that. None of us do. We don't know where God takes us. Good morning. Thankful to be here. Met some visitors already, and then met some people who have been gone so long. I felt like they were visitors again. People that don't live here any longer, visiting. I'm calling you out, Tyler. It's just good to see you. Yeah, you knew it was coming. Tyler Johnson's here. Tyler was in the youth group whenever I was a youth minister decades ago. This point. It's good to see him. Good to see Minnie. Miss Catherine, I see you back there. Miss Catherine's back with us, and I'm just so thankful. She's been dealing with some blood pressure difficulties that seem to be taken care of, and we're so thankful for that. And anyone else that's been struggling and dealing with things, our prayers are with you. I thank you, Steve, for that prayer and for the thoughtfulness of the new school year and those of our members who are suffering and hurting. Show of hands, how many know what this is a picture of? I need hands high. I need to make sure. Okay, all right. There's a lot less hands than I thought. This is a scene from the movie The Mighty Ducks. Anybody heard of The Mighty Ducks? All right, all right. It's a ridiculous movie. I loved it growing up. It does not hold up, all right? And the reason, okay, so if you don't know what this movie is about, it stars Emilio Estevez, who is a lawyer in Minnesota. He gets in some trouble with the law. He has to do community service, so he has to become a coach for a peewee, I repeat, peewee hockey team, all right? There's a reason I say this movie is ridiculous. Not only does this guy become the coach of a peewee hockey team in Minnesota, which should mean nothing to anyone except the parents of those players, right? Throughout the movie, everything this peewee hockey team does makes front page news. Front page news. Apparently all Minneapolis has is peewee hockey. It's ridiculous. This may be the most ridiculous scene, though. Anybody know what this formation was called in the movie? The Flying V. Here's why this is ridiculous. This would never work in hockey. I know very little about hockey, but this doesn't work. It's so ridiculous that in the sequel, they try it again, and they all get plastered, and the other team takes the puck and goes scores within seconds. Ridiculous. The reason behind it, though, is beautiful. At the heart of the movie is this idea of a bunch of individuals trying to understand how to be a team and care for each other. And that's what this formation is actually based on. It's based on this, right? Everybody know what this is a picture of? All right. So they're called the ducks, right? Ducks, geese, things like that, they migrate. And oftentimes when they are migrating, when they're flying, they form a flying V. And one of the reasons we're all pretty aware of, one I did not know, is maybe they do this so they can keep track of everybody in the group, so nobody in the group is left behind. But the thing I'd always known and just wanted to research and make sure I was right, the main reason is for wind resistance and energy saving. The bird at the front of the V takes on the brunt of the wind force, right? So the wind that they're flying wears them out, but every bird behind them gets less and less of that wind resistance. So when the bird at the front gets tired, it goes to the back and another bird takes its place, right? So the idea behind this is in nature, we learn about teamwork and burden sharing. We began a new series last week. It's a one another series. We're going to look at passages that are steeped in this idea of what we are to be for one another. I think it's important that we recognize that as believers of God in Jesus, followers of God in Jesus, that we have been brought into a family, right? We have brothers and sisters, which means we also have a responsibility to one another, right? We have a responsibility on how we live and treat each other. Last week, Deontay began the series by looking at the idea that we are to love one another. The reason we start there is every other one another passage is based on this idea that we love one another, that our love for one another will cause us to live a certain way, to treat each other a certain way. And in fact, if you remember Deontay's lesson, there were two things about love that all the laws and all the teachings and everything we need to know hangs under. and that is to love God with our entire being and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Everything else we ever talk about is based on those two ideas. How we are to live comes under those two ideas. So this morning, what we're going to do is we're going to begin the one another passages that exist because we love one another, which means I'm going to make the assumption that all of us want to love each other the way God has called us to. So the question is, how do we do that? How do we love each other the way God calls us to? How do we follow that command of loving one another? And we're going to answer that question by saying, we need to do this. We need to practice this concept because this concept is really found here in this passage. Ephesians 4, 1 through 3, we read, "As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received." First thing I want you to notice. Then it says, "Be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace." So here's what I want us to notice. Paul writes to the Ephesians and he says, there is a way you are supposed to live, right? Live a life worthy of the calling you have received. There is a way that we are supposed to live, a worthy way based upon being children of God. So the natural question comes is, what is that way of living, right? And he answers it. He doesn't give an exhaustive list, but he answers it by saying, we are to humble ourselves before God and one another. We are to be gentle with one another. We are to be patient with one another. And for our lesson this morning, we are called to bear one another in love. Why are we to live this way? It's not just because we're called to, but he even says at the end, if we live in this way, it will help the family of God to keep the unity of the Spirit. You know families that are jacked up, right? You know what I mean? Like it's just chaos. Brother hates brother, parents and children are at odds, cousins can't stay. I mean, it's just chaos. There's no unity in that family. It's tough to be part of that family. It's tough to visit a family like that. We as children of God, we've got to make sure we're not that kind of jacked up family. We got to make sure there's a spirit of unity within the family because that is what we are called to be. That is the life we are called to live with our brothers and sisters. And today we're going to focus on bearing one another's burdens. If we are going to be the brothers and sisters that God calls us to be, if we're going to live a life worthy of our calling, if we're going to keep the unity of the Spirit, one of the things, not the only thing, but one of the things we have to do is we have to bear one another's burdens. But notice what Paul adds at the end when he says, bear with one another in what? In love. It goes back to what we talked about last week, right? Why do we bear one another's burdens? It is because our love for God and our love for each other. It's not out of a sense of just obligation, it's out of a sense of love. We need to understand that as a family belonging to God, we are to be burden bearers. We are to seek to help our brothers and sisters in their walk with God. So when the walk gets difficult, when sin starts to bear down, when life becomes overwhelming, when faithfulness seems too heavy, we step in and we help lighten the load. But how? Right? It's a difficult thing to know how to do that. One of the beautiful things about the Bible is it's written often in story form. It tells stories to better explain deep theological truths. So when we talk about bearing one another burdens, we can talk about the theological truths, but one of the beauties of the Bible is it'll give us stories to show how that is lived out. One, and the first one I want us to begin with, was read for us. How many have heard this story about Moses before? Okay. So I want to read it one more time, not because, Adam, you did a great job, just because I think it's good for us to hear what God has to say. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. So that's the plan, right? You've got an enemy. Here's what needs to be done. We don't know why Moses needs to do what he's doing, but we find out. So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. Don't get wrapped up in why. Who knows? I think God has a sense of humor at times. And God just says, you're going to do what I want you to do. And you don't have to understand why. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. So there's two things I want us to notice about this story. The first is, and I think it's important to state this, Moses and Joshua both had different responsibilities in this situation, right? But each situation was to accomplish the same goal. So Joshua is told, you're going to go fight the Amalekites. All right, that makes sense to us, right? If you're going to defeat an army, somebody has to fight that army. So Joshua's situation in the story makes sense. Go out, fight the army. If Joshua is successful, we win. Great. But Moses is also given a responsibility. And that responsibility is to go up and stand on a hill with the staff of God, raise his arms up to the heavens, and as long as he's doing that, Israel will be victorious. The moment he stops, they will start to lose. So they're both given a responsibility. One seems more important than the other from our human standpoint, right? But what we learn is both are vital because both are trying to accomplish the same goal. And I think that's important for us to understand if we are going to be burden bearers. I believe work in the kingdom is the same today as this battle was for Moses and Joshua. We all are going to be called to carry out different tasks, called to do different things in the kingdom. But the goal is the same. For Moses and Joshua, the goal was the same. Defeat the Amalekites, right? For us, our goal is always the same. We want to do the will of God and bring glory to God, right? That, I don't care what you are called to do in the kingdom, that is its ultimate purpose. It's not for your glory. It's not for the program you love to be successful. It is so God's will can be done and he might be glorified. So some of you have been called to be teachers, while someone else has been called to heal the sick and the broken, someone else to encourage the fallen, someone else to serve the weak, and on the different roles go. But the thing we need to remember is that each work is for the same goal, and therefore each work is equally important. That's what's cool about this story. The moment Moses' hands went down, it didn't matter how strong Joshua and his men were, they started losing. And without Joshua and the army, it wouldn't matter how long Moses kept his arms up, there'd be no one to fight him. Both were equally important. Whatever we are called to do, we do because it's the will of God and we want to bring glory to him, which means no work is greater than or less than another work. In fact, each work is crucial to complete God's will. I set that stage because I think the second thing is the most important thing for what we're talking about. And it's the main reason I chose this story for the lesson today. It's seen in the fact that what each of these men are called to do, they cannot do by themselves, right? Moses doesn't say, Joshua, you go and fight the Amalekites, does he? He says, Joshua, you go and choose what? Men to help you fight the Amalekites. And Moses doesn't go up on the hill by himself, by the way. And now I hear it, Jess, and I blame you. Every time I say hill, I have a southern accent or something going on, and it's not the heel. It's like the heel of my foot. Get used to it. If you've already caught on, great. If you haven't, now you'll never not hear it again. because I keep hearing it and I can't do anything about it. Sorry. So when Moses goes up on top of this small mountain, um, he takes with him Aaron and Hur, right? And their responsibility is to make sure his arms stay in the air because neither Joshua or Moses can accomplish the task set before them by themselves. You get where this is going? Are we sure? Okay. Think about what you believe God has called you to do. Got it? Got something? Like God has given me this gift, God has given me this responsibility, God has given me this task. And we've already messed up because we believe God has given it to me and me alone. Right? Like I'll ask for help only when I'm desperate enough that I need it. I think we miss the point that God doesn't expect us to do anything He's called us to do on our own. Ever. Now, we may have a larger responsibility than someone else, but we can't do it by ourselves. We need humble, spirit-filled, God-centered people to help accomplish whatever task God gives us. I mentioned if you're a teacher, the least wise thing a teacher can do is teach with no help from anyone else. You need to seek wise counsel of other people who have either taught or are teaching to help you accomplish whatever God has put before you. Maybe you're someone who really looks out for those who are going through physical sufferings and pains and difficulties. One of the things you'll learn real quick is you're limited on how much you can help. And you need to lean on other people. You need to lean on people who may have a greater knowledge or a greater physical ability to help in some ways you can't. Or what about ministering to someone who's dealing with sin and brokenness? Do you have all the answers? God may have put that person in your life, but do you think you're the only person God wants counseling them, helping them, advising them? You need to lean on other brothers and sisters. Maybe people who have been through what they've been through. People who've been victorious in coming out of what they're going through. The last thing you need to do is take on everybody else's burdens or every task on your own shoulders by yourself. That's what this story teaches us. It teaches us we need each other. Whether we are given a task, whether we are suffering with a burden, whatever the case may be, we need help. What's interesting is it's not the only story about burden sharing. And the next one I want to share, and the only other one I want to share, comes in the very next chapter. It's almost if there's an intent in what's being written. Because in this next story, we have Moses. And we're introduced to Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. And I want to read this to you. The next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people. And they stood around him from morning till evening. All right, put yourself in Moses' shoes. You're the leader of Israel. And the people are coming with problems. And you're there from sunset or sunrise to sunset, dealing with these problems. When his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge while all these people stand around you from morning till evening?" You know what Jethro's saying, right? You're the only one doing this, and guess what? You're not enough to get it done. There are people waiting for you to hear their problems, and you don't have time to get to them. Moses answered him, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will." How many of us have made a statement similar to that? Why are you doing this by yourself? Because God has asked me to, because people come to me, because people expect me to do it. Moses has taken on this thing of, this is my responsibility. And it's my responsibility because God has asked me to do it, and the people are coming to me. They're not coming to you. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions. Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. Notice what Jethro's point is. It's not that the actions and what you're trying to do is bad. He says the execution is bad because you're getting worn out and these people are getting worn out. This work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice. And may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and instructions and show them the way they are to live and how they are to behave. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases, they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied. If there was ever a story that anybody who leads anything in the church needs to hear, this is that story. You are not sufficient on your own. And not only are you wearing yourself out, you are wearing out the people you're trying to help. It's coming from a good place, maybe. It's coming from wanting to do the will of God. But we all need people like Jethro in our lives. We need people who look from the outside, who love God and say, what you're doing is not good. I appreciate your heart. I appreciate your desire to serve. I appreciate your willingness to do what God commands. But God never expected you to be the only one to do it. I don't care what it is we're doing. And it's not just what we are called to do. How many here try to take on your own sins and struggles by yourself? You know what I'm saying? Like, this is about serving God, but even in serving God, we have to struggle with sin, right? We struggle with addictions. We struggle with temptations. And what we try to do is pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps and strong arm our way through it with no help from anybody else. And we wonder why those sins never leave, why the struggle never gets easier, why we constantly fall prey to them. It's because we're not sharing our burdens. We wonder why work in the church isn't getting done. It's because we don't share the burden. We don't look to help those who are in need, and we don't look to ask for help when we're in need. Sometimes we don't even recognize we're in need. In fact, it sounds like Moses is like, this is the only option. I'm not in need. I'm doing everything I can. No, you're not. Because you have limitations as a person. The one thing you could do is swallow your pride and ask for help. That's the most we can do. We serve and swallow pride and seek help. In fact, if you go back to Ephesians 4, what is one of the first things that Paul says when he talks about living a life worthy of our calling? He says, be humble. You don't think humility and seeking help go hand in hand? You don't think bearing one another's burdens requires humbling ourselves, swallowing pride? It does. These two stories paint a picture of not just the need for bearing burdens, but how we accomplish that. For some, we need to be the ones looking out for those who are struggling. We need to have our eyes and we need to be our eyes open, and we need to be pursuing. This person is in over their head. I need to go help them. I need to hold their arms up until sunset so God's work can be done. For others of us, we need to recognize we need some help. We need counsel. We need people taking on some of the work that has become too much for us. And we need to seek people out to help bear those burdens. Because guess what? If we're the family God calls us to be, we're willing and ready to work, most of us. Sometimes our eyes are closed and we need to open them, or we are waiting for someone to come and relinquish that power so we can help serve God too. These two stories teach us so much about burden sharing. I want to share 4 things, and they're not up here. All responsibilities and work in the kingdom are equally important because they serve the same purpose. The first thing we have to understand, whatever you're doing is just as important as what the person next to you is doing for the kingdom. Don't think your work is better or more important than somebody else, or don't think it is less than somebody else's, because you and they are trying to bring glory to God. The second thing, no one can live the life God has called them to live on their own. We need help. We need help. There's a reason we are given the church, right? Correct? We sure. You look around and you go, these are the people I'm supposed to depend on, and these are the people I'm supposed to help. These are the one another's that I'm supposed to be sharing in their burdens. If we do not seek help, number 3, we will wear ourselves out and we will wear out our brothers and sisters. It's interesting. We get frustrated with each other, don't we? And we get frustrated for a lot of reasons. One, we get frustrated because we don't think enough people are working like we are. Right? Am I wrong? We just got really quiet. Do you right now feel like you're working harder than somebody else? Thank you, Adam. The truth is, there's always somebody you believe you're working harder than. We need to find some humility. If we're the only one working in the kingdom is done for. We got to stop being like Elijah and thinking we're the only faithful person serving God. If y'all don't know what I'm talking about, do y'all know what I'm talking about when I say Elijah? Elijah was to the point of death, and he wants God to take his life because he feels like he's the only one still serving God, and God has to open his eyes and says, there's over 500 people that are still faithful to me. You arrogant bum. He doesn't say that. He should have. And he should say that to a lot of us because we are so arrogant at times. We also wear each other out because we don't recognize that people are working and need help because they're not doing the thing we want them to do. Right? This goes with that we have tunnel vision, and the most important work is mine. And anybody else may be working, but their work is not as important as mine. So we wear them out. Wondering why they're not doing this thing, because they're doing that thing. What we should be doing is asking, do you need help with that? Can I find someone to help you bear that burden? Because I need someone to help bear this burden. In Galatians 5, starting in verse 25 and going through chapter 6, verse 2, Paul writes something to the Galatians that's almost the exact same thing that he wrote to the Ephesians about bearing one another's burdens. First, we're going to notice the unity of the Spirit. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking and envying each other. Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you do what? What does it say? You fulfill the law of Christ. What is the law of Christ? It's summed up by love God and love your neighbor. So when you carry one another's burdens, you are actually fulfilling the 2 greatest commandments. To love God with your entire being and love your neighbor as yourself. We cannot say we love God if we are not willing to share in the burdens of our brothers and sisters. You just can't do it. You can't have one person pushing a boulder up a hill or a small mountain. You have to have many. We need to become like Aaron, Hur, and Jethro. We need to pursue ways to help each other out. We need to look to lighten the load of our fellow workers in the kingdom. When we see our brother or sister falling under the weight of living the Christian life, maybe it's sin, maybe it's physical infirmities that come with getting older, maybe it's confusion and hopelessness, we need to help take on some of that weight. If we say we love God, if we claim we love one another, then we must share in each other's burdens. In fact, all we need to do is to look to God to understand just how important it is to bear one another's burdens. I gave the slides out before I put this down, but if you've got your Bibles, you don't have to open it. You can open it later. Matthew chapter 11, 28 through 30. Notice what Jesus said about our God and burden sharing. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am this is God, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. We have a God who knows we are burdened. Our God knows we are burdened with sin. We are burdened with guilt. We are burdened with worry. We are burdened with doubt. And Jesus says that God can give us rest from those wearisome burdens. God can take away the burdens that keep us separated from Him, the burdens we cannot get rid of on our own. God will bring us into His kingdom, into His family. And in this new kingdom, this new family, we will find a new goal, a new purpose, a new direction. And we will be with others living for these same new things. We will belong to a God who gives us His Spirit to lighten our burdens. We will belong to a family that will help lighten our load. God is offering to take away the burdens that beat us down and destroy us. Now, He doesn't say there will be no more burdens, does He? He just says it will be lighter. It will be easier. You know why? Because we won't carry it by ourselves. God will be there, and we will be there for each other. This world does not offer that. Burdens are going to be in the world or in the kingdom. Doesn't matter. But the kingdom offers a God and brothers and sisters who will help share those burdens as we live for something more purposeful, more meaningful, with the hope for the end. Some of you belong to a family that loves you. Hopefully, both physical and spiritual. Some of you may not have given your life to God and you're not part of the family of God yet. God still loves you. We still love you. But there's one burden that you need to share, and that's the burden of sin that Jesus is willing to take and redeem and make you holy and righteous before God. Give your life to Him. Start that. And then for most of us, we've done that, right? And there's still a burden. And sometimes it's heavier than it should be as a Christian. Lean on each other. And let's open our eyes and help one another. So if you need help, come and let us take on that burden with you. As together we stand and sing.